Have we got something special for you today in this week's episode of the State of Greater Western New York Report? Have you ever wondered how you could make a better difference if you are capable of making a bigger difference in your company, in your business, in your community, in any organization that you're with? Well, believe it or not, there are traits that are similar among all these different areas where you can make a difference. It's only a matter of understanding what it takes, what those traits are, and how you score right now on those traits, and maybe how you can improve on them. We're going to be talking about that in this week's episode of the State of Greater Western New York Report, which, as always, is brought to you by...
Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard.
The Linden Honeoye Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa.
Hello and welcome again to this week's episode of the State of Greater Western New York Report. We have got a very interesting topic today, and it really applies to anybody who wants to make a difference. It doesn't matter where you are, where you work, who you work for, who you're organized with, what sort of associations you belong to, whether it's even a hobby or something that is a lot more serious. All these are something that you can benefit from, that you can make a difference from. And what we're talking about today is we're talking about this thing called the everyday entrepreneur. That's right. It's the traits, the characteristics of people who are everyday entrepreneurs. And what's the motivation? What really gets them going? What gets them clicking? What do they want to become, and why do they want to become it? It really starts off with something that's pretty simple, that everyone understands, and that is a dream. Everybody has this dream. Everybody dreams of controlling their own destiny, of being that person that they want to be, going wherever they want to go, doing whatever they want to do, impressing whoever they want to impress, and all this whenever you want to do it. So there's this dream. Everyone has a dream. Maybe it's way back there and you can barely recognize it, or maybe it's right at the forefront and it's something that's driving you every day. Whatever the circumstance is, it's there and you have it. But what's holding us back? What is really holding us back from controlling this dream of controlling our own destiny? It's as long as you depend on the kindness of strangers, as long as you rely on other people, whether you have to work for others, or you have to listen to others, or you have to do what others say. If you're relying on that, if you're stuck in that situation, then it's going to be a real challenge to realize that dream that you're seeking to realize. Why? You don't control your destiny. You don't control your life. I mean, it's really, I hate to say it, but anybody who works for somebody else doesn't control their life. Your life is controlled by your boss. That doesn't mean that that's a bad thing. It just means it limits you on what you can to do, what you want to do. Now, if you want to achieve that dream, if you want to control that destiny, you have to start with the very first thing, that you're responsible. And but here's the thing, is that when you work for somebody else, you're also responsible. You made a promise to those folks that hired you, and you're honorable enough to place their interest ahead of yours. So understand where this conflict begins, and it's very natural, and a lot of people, most people in fact, have to deal with that sort of situation. But it's that's not all. There's a sense that if you could say uh, avoid that toil. I mean, you have to toil. Why do you have to toil? I mean, you do it day after day, month after month, year after year, working hard. You're, in fact, shackled to your career. You're performing the best that you can, but all the benefits are going to somebody else. I mean, when you think about that, I hate to sound like you should be selfish here or not, but you do have to think of yourself and your family at times. And if you're always putting some non-familial interest ahead of you, or even some non-community interest ahead of you, then you're not going to be the best that you can be for your family or for your community. All you're doing is you're benefiting that someone else, and you really don't have a choice, because there's this Damocles sword that's hanging over your head. You're benefiting someone else, not you. But no matter what you're told, generally they're going to have the interest of the organization or themselves in mind, not necessarily your interest or your family's interest, or maybe even your community's interest. And when the business cycle takes a downturn, say, whose job gets cut first? So every year there's this Damocles sword hanging over your head, swinging ominously backward and forward just above you, and it's only a matter of time before, you get the picture. So what do you want to do about it? You don't want this sword hanging over your head. You want to be able to do something, and really you're going to have to start thinking about you first. You have to put matters into your own hands. Imagine your surprise when you see your face, say, in the media, or when you see your business ranked number one on those business ranking lists, or your name comes to mind to clients, family, friends, classmates, each wondering why they haven't switched to you yet, why they haven't done what you're doing, what is setting you apart. So this is inevitable. When you seize control of your own life, this is the sort of thing that emerges. You emerge from the top. You will capture everything you've ever dreamed of, whether it's starting your own business or really putting that hobby at the forefront, taking the lead in various creative efforts, things like that. So what the question becomes, how do you get to this point where you're number one? What are you doing? How are you doing it? What are the traits that you have to have? And there's actually been research, a lot of academic research on this subject. And I'm going to share a little bit with you right now about that, get into more detail in the second half. And by the end of today's show, you'll know the website to go to. It's not mine. It's actually an academic website where you can take a test, one of those crazy personality tests, maybe you'll think. But no, it's actually a more rigorous kind of tested test. It isn't just something you see in Cosmopolitan. This comes from academic research, and it'll give you some hints about where your strengths are and where the areas are that you need to improve to kind of start seizing control of your own life. So let's start with the very beginning, which is always a good place to start, at least I'm told, and that is in the field of academics. There is a professor by the name of Dr. Sally Caird. She is at the Open University, and she's a senior lecturer on the faculty of the Science, Technology, Engineering, Mathematics Department, and in the School of Engineering and Innovation. She has taken or created or studied and written several papers on this whole sense of what the enterprising tendency is. In academics, it's not necessarily called entrepreneurial spirit or whatever you want to call it. It's enterprising tendency. Why? Because they don't want to just limit it to entrepreneurs. And really, it's not. We use the term entrepreneur, and I'm using it today because I'm going to say this is all about finding out your everyday entrepreneur quotient. But I say everyday entrepreneur, they say enterprising. By everyday entrepreneur, it means you don't have to own your own business to really learn something or benefit from this exercise. You just could be a leader. You could just want to make a difference. And she has done a lot of research in finding out how you can make a difference. And she calls it this a general measure of enterprising tendency. That was her paper. She's since developed a test, and we're going to be going over that test, or at least the elements in that test. It's too complicated to actually go through the test with you. You're going to have to take it yourself and then read the analysis that comes with the test to determine what it is that you should be happy about and what it is that you need to work on, and understand why maybe you need to work on those areas. And maybe you don't want to. Maybe after it's all said and done, you say, hey, look, I'm happy where I'm at right now. That's okay. That's cool. And the world needs people who are happy. More important than they need people who make a difference. Like, if everybody wanted to make a difference, maybe nobody will make a difference. So leave the people who want to make a difference, leave that to a select few. If you're happy just watching the world go by and you're satisfied, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's good. It's probably better for you and your family. So don't worry about that. There are going to be some challenges. If you are going to want to make a difference, you're going to have to do things that maybe put you on the edge, which we'll get to in a second. So what are we going to learn about? We're going to learn about the faces of the everyday entrepreneur. So we actually have time for this. This is a sponsor that you wouldn't think about it, but really talks a lot about this entrepreneurial zest. What you do, in this case, it's about businesses, how you really exhibit those traits. You're not going to believe it when you see this, but it's actually there. So check out this and see what you think about it in terms of how it might relate to business or success or achieving what you want to achieve in the face of no one ever being there before.
Within the mists of time lie buried uncoverable answers to history's most compelling questions. What really happened to the lost continent of Atlantis? How did ancient Greeks possess the technology to create the Antikythera mechanism, and what did they use it for? Why did hundreds of people suddenly start dancing in the streets of Strasbourg during July 1518, and then, just as suddenly, die? Who was Jack the Ripper? And finally, where did Amelia Earhart end up? These questions pale to the ultimate mystery. It's the mystery behind something that has touched us all and will continue to touch generations into the future. It's the mystery behind a trillion-dollar industry. It's the mystery behind something so simple, so common, so obvious, that no one bothered to write it down. It is the birth of the world's first hamburger. Did the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis really inaugurate the Hamburg sandwich, as purportedly described in a New York Tribune article that same year, and as taught by McDonald's famous Hamburger University? Or was the first hamburger made in 1900 at Louis' Lunch, a diner in New Haven, Connecticut, as reported by the New York Times, and recognized as such by the Library of Congress? Or did Fletcher Old Dave Davis first place a ground beef patty on bread in the late 1880s as suggested by the Dallas Morning News? And if the hamburger really was first invented in 1885, either by Charles and Green at the Outagamie County Fair in Seymour, Wisconsin, or by Charles and Frank Menches at the Erie County Fair in Hamburg, New York, which fair occurred first? Join me as we explore these various origin stories and use classic crime-solving techniques to reveal the answer to one of history's greatest culinary whodunits in Sherlock Holmes and the Shrine of the Four and a Half?
Are you interested in finding out who done it? Read Hamburger Dreams, How Classic Crime-Solving Techniques Help Crack the Case of America's Greatest Culinary Mystery. Available in fine bookstores everywhere, and in an ebook edition too. Well, there you have it. Maybe what we'll do is, as we talk about these 5 traits, perhaps we'll allude to a few of those hamburger origin stories to see maybe how they map onto the enterprising tendency, or the tendency to be entrepreneurial, in the case of the business of selling hamburgers. Well, let's start right off the bat with what these things are. And it's interesting that there are 5 reasons that you may actually be an entrepreneur and not even know it. That's what we're going to be talking about right now. And let's get started with the very first one, because this one is perhaps the one that is most wrong, I'd say. Well, no, it's not wrong, but it's most misunderstood. A lot of people think that entrepreneurs are risk takers. In fact, they're not. It doesn't mean that they don't go into a risky situation. It doesn't mean that they don't understand there are risks involved with what they do, but they're not risk seekers. They're actually more like risk avoiders. So this trait is actually called calculated risk taking. And there's been a lot of studies on this, really going back to 1755. Cantillon wrote that an entrepreneur's risk-bearing function was an important part of success and being an entrepreneur. So that goes back more than 2 centuries. And it's significant because that's even before America was born, before anyone even had an idea of what a hamburger was, for that matter. But in reality, and these are now further studies, say from the late 60s and the mid 70s, entrepreneurs don't really take risks, aren't risk seeking. They're not gamblers. They don't roll the dice to see what happens, but they take moderate risks and they try to manage those risks. They want a situation where outcomes are a function of skill, not left to chance. So they're not rolling dice. They know that there's a chance that they might not succeed, but they know that there's a greater chance for success if they're able to execute what they have sought out to do. So there's a motive to achieve in this. There's a motive to avoid failure, and there's an expectancy that there's some percentage of success or failure in there, and that really almost ironically creates an incentive. This goes back to studies that were done in the late 50s. There's almost an incentive value to success or failure avoidance. So like we said, these risk takers are not really risk takers. They're risk avoiders. They manage their risk. And what Sally Caird said about these types of this particular trait is that the enterprising person is opportunistic and seeks information and expertise to evaluate if it is worth pursuing the opportunity, which usually involves some risk. Now, I'm going to go back a slide only because in our hamburger story, here we see an acrobat. Obviously, there's a lot of risk. Look how far down this person has to fall. The 2 brothers who really were the ones that created or sold the first hamburger, John and Charles Mencius, they were acrobats, athletes. They actually, Charles especially, was a circus performer, a circus acrobat. He did these high wire stunts. There's a lot of risk in that. You fall down, you get hurt, that's the end of your career, if not worse. So if you're managing your risk and you're Charles Mencius, you're going to say, hey, is there something I can do that's still affiliated with circus or carnivals or things like that is less risky and maybe I could make more money on it? So he did. He decided to become a food concessions salesman. And actually, he is a concessionaire. He had his own booths. He brought his brother in, so they started selling, in essence, pork sausage sandwiches. And that's how they made their money. He moved away from the riskier business of the high wire act. He still did it for fun. They actually ran their own circus for a little while, only because he figured the producer end of it was also a way to make money. But he loved the high wire act, so he continued doing it. Nothing ever happened from that, and he quit. Actually, he quit the circus too. But he focused more on the business of selling food. So this is an example of how you manage that risk. You stop doing the one thing that is perhaps not healthy for you and maybe doesn't have the same margins, and you focus on the thing that does really bring in more. What's the other trait that we associate with entrepreneurs? It's creativity. It's this tendency to be creative. And you look at and see what happened with the Mencius brothers. What did they get known for? They were known for selling pork sausage sandwiches. When they ran out of pork, the butcher wouldn't sell them anymore. But the butcher would sell them ground beef, which was really considered a low-class food. So they made that ground beef, molded it the same way they molded a pork sausage patty. So they made that patty that we know of as a hamburger today. That's how they were selling their pork, by the way. So it looked like the pork sausage sandwich, but it was made of a different meat. And it was a creative way to solve the problem that they were in. And in fact, the whole sense of creative tendency goes back to the really early 50s, where Schumpeter said that the emphasis on innovation is a key entrepreneurial function. And it also implies some recognition of risk bearing, but it really, that innovation and the introduction of new products or new processes to improve products, that's all part of what this enterprising tendency is. And it's defined as a tendency to be imaginative, innovative, curious, versatile. And Torrance in 1974 identified 4 abilities in terms of this, or 4 criteria in terms of this creative ability. One he called fluency, which was the ability to produce a large number of ideas, in other words, a large quantity of ideas. The second thing he called was originality, which was the ability to produce uncommon, new, imaginative, or unusual ideas. We'll call that quality. So he has quantity, quality. Then he has flexibility, which is the ability to shift from one approach to another. So like Charles and Frank Mencius, they shifted from pork sausage sandwiches to what they called hamburger sandwiches. And then finally, there's innovation. Innovation is the ability to perceive in a way that is different to the usual or established or obvious way of doing things. And again, it's those 4 traits are part of the creative ability. And if you're going to look at what Sally Card said about it, she called it the sense that there's a restlessness with ideas. The enterprising person has an imaginative approach to solving problems and tends to see life in a different way than others. Their innovative tendencies and need for achievement, which we'll get to in a second, helps them to develop ideas to create new products and processes. For example, new technologies, businesses, projects, organization, comedy, and artistic outputs. You see where this is heading? It's not just business. This entrepreneurial or enterprising tendency really kind of involves almost every area of life that it could possibly be involved with. And if you want to make a difference, the key attribute here is creativity. So you want to be, in a sense, you want to be at the high end of the creative scale. You want to be as creative as you could. Contrast that to risk. You don't want to be at the high end of the risk scale if you can avoid it. It's okay to have risk. The key thing about risk isn't being comfortable with it. The key thing about risk is knowing how to manage it. The key thing about creative tendencies or creativity is knowing how to really have a gusher of output when it comes to creative tendencies or creative acts. Now, here's the thing, is that it's all fine and good. That doesn't make you the top of the heap yet. There has to be something else that drives you to that success. And that is this need for achievement or motivation. It's called both things. And studies have emphasized this from the early 50s through the mid 80s. It's an arousal, in a sense, where competition is a standard for excellence, and situations where performance may be assessed for success or failure. It means you win or lose. You want to be in the game. And you don't just want to be in the game. You don't want just a participation trophy. You actually want to get the real trophy, the champion's trophy. Yes, that's what's key for you. And we'll talk a little bit about that participation trophy in a second. But let's see what Sally Card said about achievement or motivation, she said the enterprising person is highly motivated, energetic, and has a capacity for hard work. They're busy, driven, dynamic, and highly committed to getting things done. Their high motivation levels are characterized by a high need for achievement and for autonomy. We'll talk about that in a moment. And so they have this desire to lead, shape, and complete projects. What about autonomy? What is autonomy? Why is it important for an entrepreneur or for an enterprising person? Well, autonomy is not just making decisions for yourself. It is making decisions on your own with your own being. And it's the ability to be comfortable flying solo. So in fact, for many entrepreneurs, autonomy was the strongest reason for starting the business. That's what Watkins found out in their 1976 paper. And operationally, it's defined as the need to do and say as one likes, despite conventional expectations. That comes from Edwards' 1959 paper. So if you look at autonomy, you find attributes like determination, self-reliance, inner control, calculated risk-taking, innovation, and decision-making. What Karen said about autonomy is that the enterprising person is highly motivated, energetic, likes to lead, shape, and do things their own way. They're independent, driven, dynamic, and may have to either be number one or work solo. So we're constantly thinking or imagining the sense of a entrepreneur, almost like an engineer working by himself in the lab. No one else is running. Thomas Edison maybe comes to mind with that, tinkering with all those light bulbs, or if not working by himself, maybe working with a staff, and the staff is under him and he's directing the staff. So that's really what autonomy is. There's this last thing, though, that is most important, and that is called the internal locus of control. Sounds like a very academic term, but it's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to understand. It's the difference between if you're playing a sport or a game and you lose. Who do you blame? If you blame the ref, then you've got an external locus of control. If you blame yourself, if you think it doesn't matter what the ref did, but if I improved my play, maybe we can win next time, that means you control your own destiny. You have this internal locus of control. And it's usually associated with higher self-esteem. So remember what I said about those participation trophies? Those participation trophies were meant to boost self-esteem. But what the research shows is that if you believe in yourself, regardless of the outcome, if you win or lose, if you believe that you could have made a difference, then that's what drives self-esteem. And really, that's what this whole idea of enterprising is all about. And you take responsibility for your own successes and failures, and you attribute outcomes to ability and effort, not to luck, fate, powerful other people, or being in the right place at the right time. So it's associated with a lot of positive attributes, including insight, initiative, tolerance, dominance, achievement, well-being, assertion, independence, effectiveness, industrialness, sociability, and intellectual efficiency. So there you go. Now, we have just a few minutes left, so I'm going to go through these next slides really quickly by one, and this is going to show you what you can do. And I'm going to tell you here, just go to this site, gettotest.net. Go there. This is the screen that'll pop up. You press that little orange button, take Get To, and you'll go right to the test, which will give you a series of 54 questions. All you have to do is say whether you agree or disagree with the questions. You do that, and it'll spit out an answer for you. Here's just one random answer and tell you how you score overall, and it'll explain what that means to you, as well as how you score in each of the 5 different categories, and it will explain what that means to you. So we're kind of running short on time for this week's episode. I want to thank you for being a part of it and being here. And again, sorry I didn't get a chance to, I'll answer one quick question. Yes, I did take the test. This isn't my score, but I'll tell you, it wasn't that far away from my real score. This is just a sample score. But if you want to be a part of this this crowd and be able to ask your own questions, then go to stateof.greaterwesternnewyork.com and you will be able to ask a question on our call, and I'll be able to read it to the guest, or in this case, read it to myself. So that's all for this week. Again, if you're not seeing us live, if you're watching us on our archive, you can do that at any time. Otherwise, like our Facebook page, because you'll be notified when this re-airs at 1:30 on Sunday, or subscribe to our YouTube page. Same thing, you'll be notified at 1:30 on Sunday when this re-airs. So that's all for today. Bye-bye for now.